The USS Horizon moved through the dark space like a metal whale swimming through an endless ocean. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge watching the stars through the main screen. His coffee had gone cold hours ago, but he kept holding the cup anyway. 3 months of deep space exploration had taught him that hot coffee was a luxury he couldn't count on. "Captain, we're picking up something strange on long-range sensors," said Commander Lisa Blake from her station. She was a tall woman with short brown hair and eyes that never seemed to miss anything important. Blake had been his second-in-command for 2 years, and Morrison trusted her judgment completely. Morrison walked over to her station and looked at the readings. "What kind of strange are we talking about here, Lisa?" "Energy signatures that don't match anything in our database. The patterns are artificial but not human technology, coming from the third planet in the system." Blake touched her screen, and the display changed to show a green and brown world covered in thick clouds. "Any signs of life down there?" Morrison asked. Dr. Amy Carter looked up from the science station. She was young for a xenobiologist, only 28, but she had already discovered 3 new species during their mission. "Negative on natural life signs, Captain. But those energy readings suggest advanced technology. Someone built something big down there." Morrison nodded and turned to his chief engineer. "Danny, what's your take on this?" Danny Rodriguez was bent over his engineering console, his thick fingers dancing across the controls. He was a big man with gentle eyes who could fix anything that broke on the ship. "Power output is massive, Captain. Whatever they built down there, it's running on serious juice. Way more than any research station would need." "Could be a military installation," Blake said quietly. Morrison considered this. The outer rim was supposed to be empty space. No known alien civilizations had colonies this far out. But the galaxy was a big place, and humans had only been exploring it for 50 years. There was still plenty they didn't know. "Take us into orbit, Danny. Lisa, I want a full sensor sweep of that facility. Amy, start analyzing those energy patterns. Let's figure out who built this thing and why." The Horizon moved closer to the planet. As they entered the upper atmosphere, the sensors got a clearer picture of what lay below. The facility was huge, mostly underground, with only a few structures visible on the surface. The energy readings were coming from deep beneath the ground. "Captain, I'm detecting what looks like a landing pad," Blake reported. "And there are ships down there." "Design doesn't match anything in our files," Morrison frowned. "Unknown ships usually meant unknown aliens. And unknown aliens this far from home could mean trouble. Any weapons signatures? Negative, sir. But that doesn't mean they're not armed?" Dr. Carter suddenly looked up from her station with excitement in her eyes. "Captain, I'm reading organic life signs from inside the facility. Multiple signatures, all grouped together in what looks like containment areas." "Containment areas?" Morrison felt his stomach tighten. "What kind of life signs, Amy?" "Small humanoid. Heart rates elevated, stress indicators high." "Captain, I think these might be prisoners." The bridge went quiet. Morrison had seen a lot of things during his 20 years in space, but the idea of prisoners held in secret facilities always made his blood run cold. "How many, Amy?" "At least 40 signatures, sir, maybe more. The readings are coming from deep underground, so it's hard to get an exact count." Blake stood up from her station. "Captain, recommend we contact Starfleet Command before proceeding. This could be a diplomatic situation." Morrison knew she was right. Protocol said to report any contact with unknown aliens immediately. But something about those life signs bothered him. Small humanoids with elevated stress levels. That could mean a lot of things, and most of them were bad. "Danny, how long would it take to get a message to command?" Rodriguez checked his instruments. 6 hours minimum, sir. We're pretty far out here." "And how long for them to send back up?" 2 weeks, maybe 3. Morrison looked at the readings again. 40 or more prisoners held underground by unknown aliens. If they were in immediate danger, 2 weeks might be too long. "Lisa, prepare a shuttlecraft. We're going down to take a look." "So regulations state that first contact situations require I." "No, the regulations, Commander." But those life signs suggest people are being held against their will. We have a duty to investigate. Blake nodded, but Morrison could see the concern in her eyes. Away team composition, sir? You, me, Danny, and Amy. Standard diplomatic approach, but armed just in case. If this goes bad, I want you to get everyone back to the ship immediately. An hour later, the shuttle dropped through the thick clouds toward the surface. The facility looked even bigger from up close. Metal structures rose from the ground like mechanical mountains. Landing pads sat empty except for 3 sleek ships that definitely weren't human design. Those ships look fast, Danny said as he piloted the shuttle toward an empty landing pad. Whoever built them knows their way around aerospace engineering. Any response to our landing? Morrison asked as Blake checked her instruments. Nothing, Captain. No one's even scanning us. Either they don't care that we're here, or they want us to think they don't care. The shuttle touched down on the metal surface with a soft thump. Morrison checked his sidearm and nodded to his team. Remember, we're here to investigate and gather information. No unnecessary risks. They walked across the landing pad toward what looked like an entrance. The metal doors were twice as tall as a human and covered in symbols that none of them recognized. As they approached, the doors slid open with a soft hiss. That's either very welcoming or very trap-like, Danny muttered. The corridor beyond was dimly lit and curved downward into the ground. Their footsteps echoed off the metal walls as they walked deeper into the facility. Morrison noticed that everything was built for beings taller than humans. The ceiling was high and the doorways were oversized. Captain, Amy whispered, I'm getting stronger life sign readings. The prisoners are definitely down here somewhere. They followed the corridor as it wound deeper underground. Side passages branched off in different directions, but Morrison kept them moving toward the strongest life sign readings. The facility was quiet except for a low humming sound that seemed to come from the walls themselves. After 10 minutes of walking, they reached a large chamber filled with metal pillars that stretched from floor to ceiling. Between the pillars, Morrison could see rows of what looked like holding cells. And in those cells, pressed against the transparent barriers, were faces that made his blood freeze. Children, human children, dozens of them, ranging in age from maybe 6 years old to teenagers. They wore simple gray clothing and their faces were pale and frightened. When they saw the away team, some of them started crying. Others pressed their hands against the barriers and mouthed words that the team couldn't hear through the energy fields. My God, Blake whispered, they're all human. Morrison felt rage building in his chest like a fire that threatened to consume everything in its path. Someone had taken these children from their families and locked them up like animals. The question was who and why? That question was answered when a voice spoke behind them in perfect English. Welcome to our research facility. I trust you find our subjects interesting. Morrison spun around to see a tall alien standing in the entrance to the chamber. The creature was nearly 8 feet tall with gray skin and 4 arms that ended in clawed hands. Its head was elongated and its eyes were completely black without any visible pupils. The alien wore a dark uniform with strange symbols across the chest. I am Commander Zixthol of the Vorthik Empire, the alien said in a voice that sounded like metal scraping against stone. You are trespassing on Imperial property. Morrison's hand moved toward his weapon, but he forced himself to stay calm. Getting into a firefight with children nearby was the last thing he wanted. I'm Captain Jake Morrison of the United Earth. Starfleet, these are human children. Why are you holding them here? Zixthol tilted his head to one side like a bird studying an insect. They are research subjects. Their emotional responses provide valuable data for our psychological warfare. Programs? You're experimenting on kids? Blake stepped forward with her hand on her sidearm. Morrison could see the fury in her eyes and knew she was thinking about her own daughter who had died in a colony raid years ago. Children provide the purest emotional responses, Zixthol explained as if he was discussing the weather. Adult humans have learned to control their feelings to some degree, but young humans react with complete honesty to stimuli. This makes them perfect test subjects. Dr. Carter was scanning the cells with her medical tricorder. Captain, some of these children show signs of severe malnutrition and psychological trauma. They need immediate medical attention. Release them, Morrison said firmly. These children are protected under galactic law. Experimenting on sentient beings without consent is a crime. Zixthol made a sound that might have been laughter. Galactic. Law applies only to a civilized species, Captain Morrison. Humans are barely evolved animals. You have no rights under Vorthic jurisdiction. Danny had been quietly studying the containment system while the others talked. He whispered to Morrison, Captain, I can shut down these energy barriers, but it will take time. And once I start, every security system in this place will know what we're doing. Morrison nodded slightly to show he understood. They needed more information before they made their move. How long have you been taking human children? 2 years now, Zixthol said with obvious pride. We have conducted raids on 17 different human colonies. These subjects represent our most successful acquisitions. Acquisitions, Blake repeated the word like it tasted bad in her mouth. They're children, not property. They are whatever we choose them to be, Commander. Your species' attachment to offspring is a weakness we are learning to exploit. When we deploy our psychological weapons against human military forces, they will be paralyzed by fear for their families. Morrison felt his anger growing but forced himself to think clearly. This wasn't just about rescuing these children anymore. The Vorthak were planning to use human emotions as a weapon against all of humanity. What kind of experiments are you running? Zixthol gestured toward a control panel on the wall. Would you like to see? We have recorded extensive data on human emotional breakdown patterns. A holographic display appeared in the air showing video footage of the holding cells. Morrison watched in horror as young children were shown images of their families being killed while Vorthak scientists measured their emotional responses. In one clip, a boy who couldn't have been more than 7 years old was screaming for his mother while alien technicians took notes. You sick monster, Blake snarled and drew her weapon. Zixthol didn't seem concerned about the phaser pointed at his chest. Your reaction proves our research is correct, Commander. Human emotional bonds make you predictable and therefore weak. Morrison grabbed Blake's arm before she could fire. Lisa, stand down. We need to get these kids out first. The children will remain here, Captain, Zixthol said calmly. They are too valuable to release. However, you and your team are free to leave. The Vorthic Empire has no quarrel with Earth at this time. We're not leaving without those children. Then you will not be leaving at all. More Vorthic soldiers entered the chamber carrying energy weapons that looked far more advanced than anything the humans had. Morrison counted 6 of them plus Zixthol. Bad odds for a gunfight, especially with children in the crossfire. Captain, Amy whispered, I'm reading more life signs deeper in the facility. There might be more prisoners down there. Morrison's mind raced. Even if they could somehow overpower the guards and rescue the children in this room, there were more victims elsewhere in the complex. They needed a better plan. Commander Zixthol, perhaps we can make a deal, Morrison said, trying to buy time. The Earth government would be willing to compensate you for releasing these children. What could your primitive civilization possibly offer the Vorthak Empire? Information, technology, raw materials, name your price. Zixthol considered this. Interesting. What kind of information? Military data? Starfleet ship movements? Colony locations? Morrison hated suggesting it, but he needed to keep the alien talking while Danny worked on the containment system. You would betray your own species to save these few subjects? I would do whatever it takes to get these children home safely. Blake stared at Morrison in shock, but he gave her a look that told her to trust him. Behind the Vorthak guards, Danny was slowly moving toward the control panel for the energy barriers. Your offer has merit, Captain, but I think we will keep the children. Anyway, they are too useful to trade away. However, your ship's computer files would be valuable. Upload your navigation data and tactical information to our systems, and we will allow you to leave. And the children? The children stay. They have become quite attached to each other during their time here. Separating them now would cause unnecessary trauma. Morrison wanted to shoot Zixthol where he stood, but he could see that the alien was enjoying this conversation. The Vorthic commander was playing with them like a cat playing with mice. One of the children in the nearest cell caught Morrison's attention. It was a girl maybe 14 years old with blonde hair and determined eyes. She was making hand signals to the other children, and Morrison realized she was organizing them somehow. The kids were preparing for something. "I need to contact my ship to arrange the data transfer," Morrison said. "Of course. But make no attempt to call for assistance, Captain. My sensors are monitoring all your communications." Morrison activated his communicator, Morrison to Horizon. "Prepare to download our navigation files to the alien facility." "Sir?" came the confused voice of his communications officer. "You heard." "It's me, Lieutenant. Full compliance with their requests." Morrison hoped his crew would understand that something was wrong and start preparing for trouble. On the bridge, his tactical officer would be analyzing the alien ships and looking for weaknesses. His security chief would be organizing rescue teams. "The transfer will take approximately 1 hour," Zixthol announced. "During that time, you will remain here as our guests." Morrison nodded, but his eyes were on Danny, who had reached the control panel. The engineer was carefully studying the alien technology, and Morrison could see him figuring out how the containment system worked. The teenage girl in the cell nearest to them pressed her face against the energy barrier and mouthed words to Morrison. He read her lips carefully and felt his heart sink. She was saying, "There are more of us below." 47 children total, scattered throughout the facility. Some had been here for over a year. And now Morrison and his team were trapped along with them. But as he looked at the determination in that young girl's eyes, Morrison realized something important. The Vorthic experiments had failed in one crucial way. Instead of breaking these children's spirits, the shared suffering had made them stronger and more united than ever. The aliens were about to learn that they had seriously underestimated what humans were capable of when their children were threatened. The hour crawled by like a wounded animal. Morrison watched Danny work on understanding the alien control systems while pretending to supervise the fake data transfer. The Vorthic guards stood at attention, but Morrison could see they were getting bored. Good board guards made mistakes. The teenage girl in the nearest cell had been quietly organizing the other children. Morrison noticed she used a complex system of hand signals to communicate without making noise. The younger kids seemed to trust her completely and followed her instructions without question. "What's your name?" Morrison whispered to her when Zixthol wasn't looking. "Katie Walsh," she mouthed back. "I'm from New Boston Colony." Morrison's heart clenched. New Boston had been hit by raiders 8 months ago. 30 families had been reported missing and presumed dead. Now he knew what had really happened to at least some of them. "How many others are there?" he asked quietly. Katie held up 4 fingers, then made a 7 with her hands. 47 total, just like Dr. Carter had estimated. All human children stolen from their families and brought to this nightmare place. Blake had been studying the Vorthic guards, and she caught Morrison's eye. She pointed subtly at their weapons and made a cutting motion across her throat. The alien energy rifles looked powerful, but they appeared to have long recharge times between shots. If they could time an attack right, they might have a chance. Danny finally gave Morrison a small nod. He had figured out the containment system. But Morrison could see the worry in his engineer's eyes. Whatever Danny had learned about the alien technology, it wasn't good news. "Captain," Dr. Carter said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "I'm detecting some kind of medical emergency in the lower levels. Multiple life signs are in distress." Zixthol turned toward her with interest. "Impossible. Our medical systems monitor all subjects continuously. I'm reading elevated stress hormones and cardiac irregularities from at least 6 individuals." Carter insisted. "If they don't receive treatment soon, they could die." Morrison saw what Carter was doing. She was creating a reason for them to go deeper into the facility where the other children were being held. But Zixthol wasn't taking the bait. "Human medical readings are unreliable," the alien commander said dismissively. "Your species has wildly fluctuating biological responses to even minor stimuli." "Children are dying down there," Carter said with real anger in her voice. "Then they are weak and of no use to our research. Natural selection will eliminate the unfit subjects." Blake took a step forward with murder in her eyes, but Morrison grabbed her arm. They couldn't afford to lose control now, not with 47. Lives at stake. Katie Walsh pressed her face against the energy barrier again and mouthed something urgently. Morrison read her lips carefully. "Shift change in 10 minutes. Morrison felt his pulse quicken. If the guards change shifts, there might be a moment of confusion they could exploit. He looked at Danny and raised an eyebrow. His engineer held up 5 fingers, then pointed at the control panel. 5 minutes to disable the containment fields once he started. The problem was the quantum lock system Danny had discovered. The alien facility was equipped with a security protocol that would send an automatic distress signal to the Vorthak fleet if certain systems were tampered with. Freeing the children would trigger an alert that would bring dozens of enemy ships down on them, but Morrison had made his decision. They couldn't leave these kids here no matter what the consequences might be. "Zixthol," Morrison said, "I want to see the other children before we complete our agreement. If they're as valuable as you claim, I should inspect the merchandise." The alien commander studied Morrison with those black eyes. "You wish to purchase subjects from us, Captain?" Morrison forced himself to sound cold and businesslike. "The Earth government has uses for certain types of research data. If your experiments are producing useful results, we might be interested in acquiring some of your subjects for our own studies." Blake stared at Morrison in horror, but he couldn't explain his plan to her without alerting the guards. He had to hope she would trust him. "Fascinating," Zixthol said. "I was not aware that humans conducted research on their own young." "There are many things about humanity that might surprise you, Commander. Shall we go see the other subjects?" Zixthol considered this for a long moment, then gestured to his guards. "Very well, Captain, but only you and one other may come. The rest of your team will remain here." Morrison looked at his people and made a quick decision. "Commander Blake, you're with me. Danny, Amy, keep monitoring that data transfer." As they prepared to leave the chamber, Katie Walsh caught Morrison's attention one more time. She pointed at herself, then at the other children, and made a gesture, like she was gathering them together. Morrison nodded slightly to show he understood. When the time came, she would make sure all the kids were ready to move. The group walked deeper into the facility with Morrison and Blake following Zixthol, while 2 Vorthak guards brought up the rear. The corridors here were even darker, and the air smelled of fear and desperation. "Tell me, Commander," Zixthol said as they walked, "what kind of research does Earth conduct on human children?" Morrison had to think fast. "Psychological development studies, educational enhancement programs. We found that children respond differently to various stimuli than adults do." "Indeed. And you would be willing to subject your own young to experimental procedures?" "For the advancement of human knowledge, yes. Some sacrifice is always necessary for progress." Blake was walking beside Morrison, and he could feel the anger radiating from her like heat from a fire. She thought he was serious about buying children from these monsters. He hoped she would understand later that this was all part of the plan. They reached another large chamber filled with more containment cells. Here Morrison saw the younger children, some barely old enough to walk. Many of them were crying, and several appeared to be sick. The sight of children this young locked in alien cages made Morrison want to tear Zixthol apart with his bare hands. "These are our newest acquisitions," Zixthol explained proudly. "Taken from the Kepler-7 colony just 2 weeks ago. They are still adjusting to their new environment." "Kepler-7," Blake whispered. Morrison knew what she was thinking. Kepler-7 had 700 colonists, including nearly 200 children. If these were just the newest acquisitions, where were the rest? What happened to the others from Kepler-7? Morrison asked. The adults were eliminated, of course. They served no research purpose and consumed too many resources. Only the children between ages 4 and 16 are useful to our studies. Morrison felt something break inside his chest. 700 people dead, their children stolen and tortured in the name of alien science. The Vorthak weren't just cruel, they were evil in a way that Morrison had never encountered before. "I think I've seen enough," Morrison said quietly. "Excellent. Shall we discuss terms for a purchase agreement?" Morrison looked at the terrified faces of the children in their cages and made a promise to himself that none of them would spend another night in this place. "Yes," he said, "let's talk about terms." But the only terms Morrison was interested in were the terms of Zixthol's surrender. Morrison and Blake followed Zixthol back toward the main chamber where Danny and Dr. Carter were waiting. The alien commander seemed pleased with himself, believing he had found a buyer for his human test subjects. Morrison let him think that, while his mind worked on the rescue plan, "I am prepared to offer you 12 subjects for the price of 10, Zixthol said as they walked. "The younger ones require less maintenance and provide more consistent emotional responses." "How generous?" Morrison replied, fighting to keep his voice steady. Every word out of the alien's mouth made him want to reach for his weapon. When they reached the main chamber, Morrison saw that Danny had positioned himself near the control panel while Dr. Carter was scanning the children with her medical equipment. Both of them looked up as the group returned. "Captain, several of these children are in critical condition," Carter announced loudly. "If they don't receive proper medical care within the next few hours, we're going to lose them." Zixthol waved a clawed hand dismissively. "Acceptable losses, Doctor. The strong will survive and provide better research data." That was when everything went wrong. A 7-year-old boy named Tommy Martinez suddenly collapsed in his cell. The child had been sick for days, but now he was convulsing on the floor while the other children screamed for help. Dr. Carter rushed toward his containment field with her medical kit. "Stop," Zixthol ordered. "The subject is not to be treated. This is an excellent opportunity to observe human death responses in a group setting." Carter ignored him and started working on the control panel to lower the energy barrier. One of the Vorthak guards raised his weapon and aimed it at her back. "I said stop, Doctor." Blake drew her phaser and fired at the guard before Morrison could react. The energy beam hit the alien in the chest and sent him crashing into the wall. The other guards immediately raised their weapons as alarms began blaring throughout the facility. "Danny now!" Morrison shouted as he dove for cover behind one of the metal pillars. His engineer's fingers flew over the alien. Control panel as phaser fire erupted around the chamber. Danny had spent the last hour memorizing every circuit and connection in the containment system. Now he put that knowledge to work as energy bolts exploded against the walls near his head. The first row of energy barriers flickered and died. Children began pouring out of their cells as Katie Walsh organized them into groups. The older kids grabbed the younger ones and started moving them toward the chamber exits just like Katie had planned. "Katie, get them to the surface." Morrison yelled over the sound of weapons fire. "What about the others downstairs?" She called back, "We'll get them. Just go." Morrison fired at a Vorthak guard and watched the alien spin and fall. Blake was crouched behind another pillar, laying down covering fire while Carter worked frantically to save Tommy Martinez. The little boy was still convulsing, but at least he was breathing. Zixthol had taken cover near the entrance and was shouting orders in his own language. More Vorthak soldiers were arriving from other parts of the facility. Morrison counted at least 8 enemies now, and the odds were getting worse by the minute. "Captain, I've got 23 kids moving toward the exit," Danny reported as he continued working on the control panel. "But the quantum security system is about to activate. We've got maybe 2 minutes before this whole place sends out a distress call. How long to free the rest of the children?" 3 minutes minimum." Morrison made the hardest decision of his career. They could save most of the children, or they could save all of them, but not without bringing the entire Vorthak fleet down on their heads. Either way, some of these kids might not make it home. "Blake, take Carter and Danny and get those children to the shuttle." "I'm going after the others." "Like hell you are, Jake. We're not leaving you here." That's an order, Commander. Before Blake could argue further, Morrison broke from cover and charged toward the corridor that led to the lower levels. Zixthol saw him coming and stepped into his path with all four arms spread wide. "You will not take my research subjects, Captain." Morrison didn't slow down. He hit the alien commander like a linebacker tackling a quarterback, driving them both to the floor. Zixthol was stronger than any human, but Morrison had 20 years of combat experience and rage on his side. They rolled across the metal floor, trading blows while weapons fire continued around them. Zixthol's claws raked across Morrison's chest, tearing through his uniform and drawing blood. Morrison responded by driving his knee into the alien's midsection. "Blake, go!" Morrison shouted as he struggled with Zixthol. "Get those kids out of here." Blake hesitated for a moment, then grabbed Carter and started herding the rescued children toward the exit. Danny was still working on the control panel, his face tight with concentration as he tried to free the remaining prisoners before the security system activated. Katie Walsh appeared beside Morrison with a piece of broken metal in her hands. Without hesitation, she drove the makeshift weapon into Zixthol's shoulder. The alien commander roared in pain and backhanded the girl, sending her flying across the chamber. That was Morrison's chance. He drew his sidearm and pressed it against Zixthol's head. "Call off your guards or I paint the walls with your brains." "You would not dare," Zixthol hissed. "Humans are too weak to kill in cold blood. Try me." For the first time since they had met, Morrison saw uncertainty in those black alien eyes. Zixthol had spent 2 years studying human emotional responses, but he had never encountered a human parent whose children were threatened. "Stand down!" Zixthol commanded his soldiers. The weapons fire stopped, but Morrison could hear more guards approaching from the lower levels. They were running out of time. "Danny, status report. Almost got it, Captain. The last group of energy barriers should drop in 30 seconds. Morrison looked around the chamber and saw that Katie Walsh was getting back to her feet despite the blow she had taken. The girl was tough as nails and refused to stay down. She reminded Morrison of his own daughter at that age. "Katie, when those barriers drop, you get every kid you can find and run for the surface. Don't wait for us." "What about you, Captain?" "Don't worry about me, kid. Just get your people to safety." The remaining energy barriers flickered and died just as the facility's quantum security system came online. Red warning lights began flashing throughout the complex as an automated voice announced in the Vorthic language that a distress signal was being transmitted. Children began pouring out of the lower level cells, some running on their own while older kids carried the younger ones. Morrison counted heads as they passed. 41, 42, 43. They were close, but not everyone was accounted for yet. "Where are the others?" Morrison demanded. Katie pointed toward a sealed door at the far end of the chamber. 4. Kids are in isolation cells behind there. They've been sick, and the aliens were using them for medical experiments. Morrison felt his heart sink. 4 more children, probably too weak to run. And somewhere above them, Vorthak warships were already responding to the distress signal. "Blake, get everyone to the shuttle and prep for immediate departure." "We're not leaving without you, Jake." "You will if I order it." "Those kids need medical attention, and we're about to have company." Morrison released Zixthol and ran toward the sealed door. Behind him, he could hear the alien commander getting to his feet and shouting new orders to his guards. The brief ceasefire was over, and the shooting would start again any second, but Morrison had made a promise to himself that no human child would spend another night in this place. Even if it killed him, he was going to keep that promise. Morrison reached the sealed door and found it locked with alien technology he didn't understand. Behind him, weapons fire erupted again as Zixthol's guards resumed their attack. Energy bolts sizzled past his head as he worked frantically on the door controls. "Danny, I need this door open now." His engineer was already moving, dodging energy blasts as he crossed the chamber. "Cover me, Captain." Morrison turned and fired at the nearest Vorthak guard, buying Danny precious seconds to reach the door. The alien control panel sparked and hissed as Danny's fingers worked their magic on the foreign circuits. The door slid open to reveal 4 small cells carved into the rock wall. Inside each cell was a human child, but these kids were in much worse condition than the others. They were pale and weak, barely able to stand. Morrison could see needle marks on their arms where the aliens had been taking blood samples. "Come on, kids, we're getting out of here," Morrison said as gently as he could while laser fire exploded around them. The oldest of the 4 children was a boy, maybe 10 years old. He looked up at Morrison with eyes that had seen too much suffering. "Are you really here to save us?" "Yes, son, I'm here to take you home." Morrison gathered the weakest child in his arms while Danny helped the other 3. These kids had been used for medical experiments and could barely walk. Getting them to the surface would be nearly impossible with Vorthok soldiers shooting at them. "Blake, status report." Morrison called into his communicator. "We've got 39 kids loaded onto the shuttle, Captain. Katie Walsh says there are still 4 missing. We've got them. Prepare for emergency takeoff. And Blake, if Vorthok ships show up before we get there, you take off without us. Captain, I am not leaving you behind." "That's a direct order, Commander." Morrison and Danny emerged from the isolation cells with the 4 children just as more Vorthok guards entered the chamber. There were too many enemies now and not enough cover. Morrison made a desperate decision. "Danny, get these kids to the surface. I'll hold them off." "Captain, you can't fight all of them alone." "I can buy you enough time to get away. Go." Before Danny could argue, Katie Walsh appeared at Morrison's side carrying an energy rifle she had taken from a fallen guard. The teenage girl's face was set with determination that would have impressed a veteran soldier. "Nobody gets left behind, Captain," she said firmly. "That's what my dad taught me before the raiders took our colony." Morrison wanted to order her to leave with the others, but he could see it would be pointless. Katie Walsh had been protecting younger children for months in this nightmare place. She wasn't going to stop now. "Can you use that weapon?" "I've been watching the guards for 8 months. I know how it works." Katie raised the alien rifle and fired at a Vorthok soldier who was advancing toward the isolated children. Her shot hit the enemy center mass and dropped him instantly. Morrison stared at her in amazement. 15-year-old girls shouldn't be that good with weapons, Katie. 15-year-old girls shouldn't be locked in alien prisons either, Captain. Together they laid down covering fire while Danny helped the 4 sick children toward the exit. Morrison's phaser was running low on power, but Katie's stolen rifle seemed to have plenty of charge left. Zixthol appeared from behind a pillar, his shoulder bleeding from where Katie had stabbed him earlier. The alien commander's black eyes were filled with rage as he raised his sidearm. "You will not take my subjects," he roared. Morrison turned to fire at Zixthol, but his phaser chose that moment to run out of power. The weapon clicked uselessly as the alien commander took aim. Morrison threw himself in front of Katie just as Zixthol pulled the trigger. The energy bolt hit Morrison in the chest and sent him sprawling. Katie screamed and emptied her rifle into Zixthol, hitting him with enough energy to kill 3 aliens. The Vorthok commander crashed to the floor and didn't get back up. "Captain?" Katie knelt beside Morrison and tried to help him stand. "We have to go." Morrison could feel his strength fading, but he forced himself to get up. They were so close to getting everyone out. He couldn't give up now. "I'm okay, kid. Let's finish this." They stumbled toward the exit as the facilities automated. Systems began shutting down around them. The quantum security alert had triggered lockdown protocols and blast doors were sealing throughout the complex. Morrison and Katie barely made it through the last door before it slammed shut behind them. The corridor to the surface stretched ahead of them like a tunnel of hope. Morrison leaned on Katie's shoulder as they climbed toward daylight. Behind them, the facility was going dark as its power systems failed. They emerged onto the landing pad to find Blake waiting with the shuttle engines already running. All 46 children were aboard, and Dr. Carter was treating the most seriously injured ones. When Blake saw Morrison's condition, she ran to help him. "Jake, you're hurt badly. We need to get you to sickbay." "The kids first, Lisa. Make sure all the kids are okay." Blake helped Morrison into the shuttle while Katie took one last look at the alien facility. "I hope that place burns to the ground," she said quietly. "It will, kid. Places like that always do." The shuttle lifted off just as 3 Vorthic warships dropped out of hyperspace above the planet, but they were too late. The human shuttle was already accelerating toward orbit where the USS Horizon waited. Blake to Horizon. We have all 47 children, and we're coming home. On the shuttle, Morrison looked around at the rescued children and felt a deep satisfaction despite his injuries. They had done it. Every single child was free and heading back to human space. Katie Walsh sat down beside him and offered him a small smile. Thank you, Captain Morrison, for not giving up on us. Thank you, Katie, for being braver than most adults I know. As the USS Horizon jumped to hyperspace with its precious cargo, Morrison thought about what Zixthol had said about human emotional bonds being a weakness. The alien commander had been wrong about that, just like he had been wrong about everything else. Human love and protection for children wasn't a weakness that could be exploited. It was a strength that made humans willing to fight impossible odds and never surrender. The Vorthic Empire was about to learn that lesson the hard way when word of this rescue spread throughout the galaxy. 47 human children were going home, and the universe would never be the same because of what they had endured and overcome together. The aliens had tried to break the human spirit by targeting the most innocent among them. Instead, they had awakened something far more dangerous than they could ever imagine. They had awakened the protective fury of an entire species, and that fury would burn brighter than any star until every human child was safe and every alien who threatened them was nothing but dust in the void. The rescue was over, but the real war was just beginning, and humanity would win it because they were fighting for something the aliens could never understand. They were fighting for love.